Hey, sovereign wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to another episode of Simon Dixon Hard Talk Live. It is becoming more and more obvious what is happening here and what this Iran war was all about. And guess what? You will own nothing and be happy. Allow me to make the case, and I'm going to be going through everything that's happened this week in the Iran war and how it relates to you and what you need to do to protect yourself, both from a technical aspect, both from a macro aspect, and also from a geopolitical aspect. So we've been covering week one and week two of the Iran war from the perspective of how it impacts you so that we can forecast ahead and you can become more sovereign at the end of it by understanding and following the money rather than following the headlines so you don't get caught with your pants down when they're trying to take away your sovereign freedom using and weaponizing the proof of weapons network that weaponizes both the war, financial weapons of mass destruction, and technology in order to usher in this multipolar world as well as a global technocratic 1984 programmable money nightmare. So let's jump right in. The title of this week's episode is Iran War Week 3. The settlement phase begins. I'm going to make the case while people think that this is escalating to World War III and that there is no solution, and this will go on for a long time. The financial markets and the maths tell me it can't go on for a long time without creating massive demand destruction. And so I'm going to make the case why I think the settlement phase has begun and what we saw this week that makes me believe that is true. And remember, the overarching theme, you will own nothing and be happy. I want you to have that in the back of your mind as we go through this. We're going to do this as usual in two parts. In part one, I'm going to go through Iran War Week 3. And this is going to be essentially the financial industrial complex settlement phase, I'm calling this. What are the early indications that there's going to be a settlement and what it actually means for you, while everybody else is predicting World War III, massive escalation? I believe that this is managed chaos and it has a very specific purpose. And we're going to find out in the weeks ahead. In part two, I'm going to be going through a interview that Peter McCormack did with me. The last one got over almost 600,000 views, and it was the top 5 videos in 10 years of podcasting for Peter McCormack. And so he asked me to come back, and while I was traveling, I'm on the move rather than at the studio at the moment. I thought I'd pop by and do a second follow-up interview. The title of that is Weaponizing the Iran War. You will own nothing and be happy. So I'll go deeper into, the actual implications from both a spiritual perspective and individual perspective, and the desired psychological impacts this is meant to have. And that's my second interview with Peter McCormack. I'd really appreciate you if you could go over also to Peter McCormack's channel, get it some views as well, because we'd love to get that a top 5 again, like last time. So without further ado, let's jump straight into part one. Iran War Week 3, the financial industrial complex settlement phase. Right. So let's recap what we've covered previously as well. Now, what I want you to do is suspend disbelief while you're watching this. Everyone has opinions around what happens. It's based upon their experience, how they translate this, where they were brought up, and you will have a data bank of information based upon lies and propaganda that you will believe around this war. Now, whether you believe that this is, an Iran Contra affair, which we've covered many times, I'm not going to cover that again, but an Iran Contra affair style coordination, where effectively there was declassified CIA documents from the 1980s, where Iran, Israel, and US were working together. And I've always made the case that that relationship has led to, trillions of dollars of money being printed in strategic tension like Operation Gladio, where you fund stay-at-home militia armies in order to create tension so that you can extract resources and you can justify the forever war model. I've covered that many times in previous episode, but you don't need to believe that to get the same conclusion. Maybe you just believe that this is pure geopolitics, there's no coordination, and this is just absolute chaos. And then the corporate interest, the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, and the technical industrial complex will weaponize and take advantage of the chaos. You can believe whatever you want. I use my model of following the money that gives indications that these things are understood before they happen. But either model, whatever you want to believe, it doesn't really matter because the outcome will be the same. So there's something here for everybody. The one, you know, the basically this crisis will either, be weaponized by power or it was engineered by power in the first place. But what was the desired end goal? I've always said that this war will be a theatrical war like the 12-day war. And last week, in the weeks ahead, I said, wow, this is accelerated and there are resistance factions, but the end result will be the same, that the financial industrial complex has an agreed, a defined outcome, strategic goals, and there are things that go wrong, there are hedges, there are adjustments, but I still believe that this is a coordinated. Now, I also define theater. Theater doesn't mean the deaths aren't real, the weapons aren't real, the war isn't real. There are factions of power that are fighting real wars, but at the very, very top layers, there is a level of coordination with which spans across all jurisdictions, all world leaders that represent transnational capital. And they have a defined outcome, and nothing stops that train. And if they need to adjust, then there is adjustments. But the idea is that this will accelerate what covered last week in week 2, the global reset. This is a shift to a multipolar world while there is a global technocratic, control grid that's being set up, depending on which part of the world you live in. And the agenda is that you will own nothing and be happy. This is defined in the World Economic Forum, Davos conferences, where world leaders, project their interpretation of the world and people adjust to that. Now, that's just one faction of business power. I've covered this whole proof of weapons network many times, and that there are transnational capital that's represented by the financial industrial complex. Then there are the technical industrial complex and the military industrial complex. I won't go into those today. We'll do a quick recap in the interview for those that are new to this. But what you need to understand is that they work in 3 phases, and a war, a crisis, always goes through the same phases. As we said, it could either be coordinated, which I believe it to be, or it could be that they just take advantage of it, whichever you want to believe. Phase 1 is where the military industrial complex profits from war, destruction, the selling of weapons, leveling down infrastructure and building infrastructure, so that it can be effectively built back better. And when it is built back better, it is built in a different way to serve an agenda for phase 2, the financial industrial complex. So once you wage these wars, you get to extract all of the resources, you get to profit from the demolition, and you get to lay the field for the rebuild phase. And in phase 2, that's when the financial industrial complex that provided the financing as well as government budgets and the bond markets provided the financing. Obviously, the bond markets is issued by the financial industrial complex through government debt. The people end up with the debt, but the debt needs to be rolled over because fiat currencies are structured as debt. And so in the end, you strip out all the assets until more and more is owned by a few, and you become a product, a collateralized debt obligation. You're locked in through mortgages, credit card debt. Your wages don't outperform inflation. And so you have this transfer of wealth in a K-shaped economy that ends in what's happening now: fiscal dominance, extreme popularism, the manufacturing of civil unrest in order to weaponize profit, build in the surveillance state. But anyway, phase two is where the financial industrial complex. That's where I believe we are in right now in week two and week three of the Iran war. This is basically renegotiation of all contracts in line with a once in a century, once in a lifetime shift of the world order. And that is the global reset that I covered in both week one and week two last week. So this is where you take all the energy contracts and you renegotiate them. You'll see the word force majeure a lot. You'll also need to follow the money and understand the flow and what it means, because where energy flows, control follows. So whoever controls the energy and the energy routes, control follows. And then you have to look at the ownership structure of that energy. Is it nationalized energy, as it is with the Gulf countries or as it is with Russia? Or is it privatized energy, as it is with Chevron and Exxon, and various other companies and BP and Shell in the West? Or is it energy dependency while building infrastructure like it is with China? So those three things determine who controls the flow. So, for example, in the West, because all of the private energy companies are private, then they make up a part of the private sector interest of the financial industrial complex. If a country like the Gulf has their own sovereign wealth fund, then it is nationalized interest that's utilized in order to negotiate leverage and join the financial industrial complex, but remain a degree of sovereignty. If you are required to manufacture as China is, or maybe India and various other manufacturing bases, then you get to control the input functions of the financial industrial complex too. So the manufacturing base is like the base layer, and then the ownership structure determines who gets to influence that, but they have to be subordinate to the manufacturing base. And then finally, those that have privatized, securitized, and financialized all their energy, they are controlled by private corporate interests, as is the case in the West. And so governments become subordinate to private corporate interest. Effectively, you take all of these energy contracts and you load countries up with debt that are on the wrong side of that cycle. You create new trade routes by waging wars and resetting the maps. And you create new supply chain dependencies by choking certain strategic points and renegotiating contracts, insurance contracts, trade routes, financial dependencies, bonds, bailouts, all those types of things. But basically, you're renegotiating everything and repricing everything. And by using this mechanism of a debt-based Ponzi scheme, where there's not enough debt to pay all the money, the currency is debt, then you have to always have this wealth extraction K-shaped economy. That means that right now you hit a phase where the wealthy are effectively doing all the consumption. In the case of the US, the top 10 wealthy are responsible for 50% of the consumption, and the rest are consuming on debt, which makes the bank wealthier as well. And so debt creates this dependency. And so repricing always disproportionately benefits the wealthy that control the assets, and they end up controlling more assets and turning more countries, companies, and individuals into collateralized debt obligations where you effectively become the product. But this is basically a settlement phase. The pre-negotiated world order had already been set up. I've always talked about how Trump was installed and Liberation Day was to liberate the world from the dollar in recognition that China with the manufacturing base and America hollowed out through financialization and securitization had already lost the trade war. And Trump was the one that needed to deconstruct everything that backed up the dollar to remove the world reserve currency for the financial industrial complex, who are managing flows in a multipolar world while making sure they can extract as much assets out of the West. And then you need crisis in order to create these global resets and then renegotiate everything. Now, when I was predicting another 12-day war, remember I said initially that Trump would be installed in order to go to war with Iran. Then, as the trade war and the tariffs happened, I thought we could transition without the war. Then I predicted that maybe we don't need the war, but we had the 12-day war. Then I said this will be a theatrical three-way victory negotiated outcome that moves to the next phase of negotiation. The next phase of negotiation happened, and then I said there will be the final transitionary war. I thought it would look very similar to the 12-day war, but it looks like it's been a lot more aggressive in order to turn what could have taken years into a very, very condensed short time frame. That's when you have this destruction for the rebuild phase. And so in phase three, we handed over to, the financial industrial complex benefits throughout the whole way through. But in phase three, we hand over to the technical industrial complex. That's the next phase. That's when essentially you have manufactured scarcity that leads to energy constraints and a need for you to use technology in order to change your behaviors, change your spending patterns, and provide all the data that is needed for this data-driven 1984 Orwellian nightmare where effectively the control grids are built. So everything is rebuilt with technology. By making housing unaffordable, suddenly Tesla comes along with a $7,000 affordable house, which is fully electric, fully controlled grid. Suddenly Tesla changes its strategy from you will own cars till we will build, automated replacements for Uber and cab drivers, and you will effectively rent your cars, but you'll give us data in every movement. X becomes a platform for freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. And then you provide all of the algorithm to build your social credit score. Money becomes programmable through stable coins or countries that can get away with central bank digital currencies. One is controlled by the financial banks. The other is private controlled and through the central banking and the Fed system transfers power to the private sector interest. And of course, everything done through artificial intelligence so that you can control the narrative as well. And you can replace humans with AI and robotics. Eventually, that moves to a universal basic income where it's pitched to you as a utopia where you don't need to work. But in the end, you're in your home on technology. And I've always talked about how to resist against that and remain sovereign at the same time as utilizing that, because nothing stops this train. Opting out is not really an option, but you do need to prepare for it so that you've got your sovereign wealth building at the same time. You need to be an asset owner rather than an asset to the bank, which is somebody that takes on all the debt. But anyway, this is where you get, energy refactoring, force majeure contracts, lock in at higher prices, subordination of countries that don't have energy infrastructure, carbon credit scores, ESG, refactoring, destruction of manufacturing bases, hollowing out of infrastructure. And you even can have lockdown style demand, centers. So we've already, seen that the IEA, the Energy Association, International Energy Association, I think it is, they've already suggested to save energy, stay at home. And so you can have more aggressive policies. The thing to realize right now is even if the strait opens today, Nothing stops the impact. I've been giving 10-minute market updates all this week. They're on my YouTube channel. Make sure you watch them. Each day I go through the financial aspects of that have been happening. And I publish them all on my blog on SimonDixon.com. Here is what's already set up. There are 3,200 shipments that break all supply chains in the Strait of Hormuz. This is guaranteed inflation. Energy prices go up. We've already seen the producer price index in US from February data came in hot at 3.4%. That has a delayed effect on consumer price inflation index, sorry. So the CPI comes 3 months later. Then we had the Fed meeting this week. He said, no, we're not changing rates. Inflation is transitory narrative. And then you have to hike rates to deal with the inflation. But at the same time, you've got this structural unemployment from the AI trade. And you've also got the need to roll over the debt at lower interest rates. This breaks a lot of stuff. So this creates an inflation cycle as a result of energy costs. That needs a big print. So excessive money printing, bigger than COVID style, in order to fix markets that are broken. We've seen private credit markets, various other things. I don't want to go too deep into this right now because I want to focus on the outcome. Then that creates where the prices of goods are too high because 92% of all assets owned by 10% of people, they benefit from all the asset price increases as a result. But as the price of goods go up, you get demand destruction. Now, if you have too much demand destruction, then you enter into a depression or a global recession. But they want a managed transition, a managed recession, so that they can extract more assets like they did during the COVID phase and the Russia-Ukraine inflationary cycle. This then leads to a recession, a correction in asset prices, retail selling, and then the venture capitalists and the vulture capitalists, they pick up long-term assets and turn everyone into serfs where you will own nothing and be happy. Now, a price of oil above $160 creates too much demand destruction. So they want to manage the price of oil so that it has the desired impact, the redistribution. And then you do things with these higher energy costs. People choose between eating and heating was how they did it last time, at these energy costs. And the only way to crash the price of oil, so all of that happens already. There's no reversing now. Supply chains are broken. The whole of 2026, we're going to see that cycle and massive money printing and crashing the price of oil is the only way to reverse that. So even if the Strait opened today, that would crash the price of oil, but all of this impact would already have been had already. Based upon some of the destruction of infrastructure that already happened, it would take maybe 2 to 3 weeks to clear out the ships once it's open. Then in order to rebuild some of the oil infrastructure prior to this week's escalation, maybe you need 2 to 3 months to come back all the energy back online. But with this week's escalation, it's now probably a year, and even Qatar is saying up to 5 years for certain countries where they'll have to force majeure on those energy contracts. This leads to energy insecurity and all of the policies of how to preserve this energy. And eventually there'll be beta tests for lockdowns, carbon credit tracking, this whole financialization, tokenization of all these different types of agendas, where you'll only be able to consume energy and you'll be competing with artificial intelligence, and they'll financialize it and securitize it so you can trade the consumption of your energy and individual carbon credit scores integrated with social credit scores, integrated with stable coins and central bank digital currencies. This is the control layer that you need manufactured crisis and manufactured wars in order to do it. So all this to say, this isn't just a war. This is a transition between world orders. This is the deconstruction of the American military industrial complex post World War II, Bretton Woods order, in recognition of the financial industrial complex and the multipolar world that I've been discussing for years, and sharing that as soon as if you remember way back then, I said during the Biden administration and during the war escalation, you would end up with Trump installed. And with Trump installed, he would take responsibility for the effective fall of the US empire in a managed transition, because he's so aligned with the financial industrial complex, and he'll create a deceitful MAGA narrative. This has got nothing to do with Trump, nothing to do with TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. Whoever you put there would have had the same thing. Nothing stops this train. Same under Biden, same under Obama, same under Clinton. Open borders, closed borders. This is the financial industrial complex that all governments are subordinate to, that can manage portfolios in order to have these big shifts. As I said, you either believe, like me, that they can coordinate it, hedge it, or you just believe that they weaponize it as it comes and it's more organic. Anyway, so let's get into the week 3 context and why everybody believes that this is getting out of control, moving to World War III. China will join, Russia will join, and we'll enter into a regional war and world war. They're talking about the destruction of the Gulf countries, the end of the Gulf countries. Remember, they're part of the financial industrial complex layer. And when FIC wants leverage, they create events using the military industrial complex so that they can renegotiate terms based upon power dynamics, how sovereign they are, as we manage this. But they don't want the game to get off kilter. They don't want so much destruction that this goes off onto its own rail. And there are factions of power, like the military industrial complex, represented by extreme Zionists in Israel, extreme neocon Zionists in America that are used to the old world, and also hardliner factions within the IRGC that benefit from the resistance economy as a result of sanctions and adjusting to the reality. And those Iran-Contra affair types of relationships that I still believe persist today. And as I said, this works, these operations, they work. It doesn't mean everyone's in on it and they're coordinating in a boardroom. They signal through these mechanisms, but factions of power have aligned. And I believe this particular plan for the vision of the Middle East was to expel the US from the region and turn the Middle East back into West Asia, based upon the reality that China is the manufacturing base with vast sovereign wealth, vast resources. And even if America said we'll go to war with China, it will never be real, because China can just switch off the exports that are required to manufacture F-35 fighter jets and various other things. So in recognition of that reality, even America's nuclear program relies upon nuclear enrichment from Russia. That kind of tells you everything you need to know. So anyway, week 1 was all about shock to pricing, the shock of we are in war, the shock of, oh, Trump betrayed us, and or the shock of, oh, Israel rules the world, the shock of we're actually, going to take on the Western Empire, the shock of the Gulf countries can have their US bases targeted, the shock of, all right, US is going into war. All of the different influencers, they have their narrative, they galvanize you into your version of the world, whether it's the Jews rule the world narrative, whether it's the, oh, Qatar is funding and Muslim invasion, radical Islamist terrorist version of the world, whether it's Trump is playing 5D chess, Qtard version of the world, whether it's, this is a religious battle between, end of time prophecies in the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, and the Christian faith, based upon the more institutionalized parts of those religion. They're feeding you your narrative, and you're getting your algorithm is radicalizing you deeper and deeper, and you're finding your favorite influencer that they're boosting in order to radicalize you further into that belief system. So week 1 was the shock phase, and you would have blamed the war on whoever you've already predetermined by algorithm rules the world or is responsible for it. In week two, we talked about the global reset framework. I covered that all last week. That by closing the strait, all contracts are renegotiated. The world is reset. We have the global reset. Nothing stops that train. It's already happened. We are already in a multipolar world. There is no, oh, right, America's going to occupy Iran and take over all the oil fields and price it in dollar, and America's going to dominate the world and be the hegemon. None of that is happening because those that you think are fighting that battle, those that control the US government, the Western governments, are the financial industrial complex, are the ones that lobby all the politicians, are the deep state blackmail operations via all these things. So in week three, we've hit what I believe the early signs of the settlement phase beginning. This is where you bring everything to a crescendo, where it's clear you have a three-way off ramp, and you have a victory for everybody that needs the relative narrative to move to a new version of what Israel is, what US is, and what Iran is, and also what the Gulf countries are, and then the reaction from all the global powers around it. But you need a big theatrical Hollywood movie that drives everyone into the belief that we're about to enter into a nuclear war. But nuclear war is mutually assured destruction. And I can assure you, nobody wants that, despite the rhetoric. You know, the rhetoric is all for public consumption to make you think something else is happening so that you comply with you will own nothing and be happy. So the question we have to ask ourselves, why in week three do I believe that when most people believe the exact opposite? Is because I have a different structure for following markets and understanding who I think controls things and what the narratives are to radicalize you into a alternative reality, whether it's left and right, whether it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, it's the Jews, it's the Muslims, it's imperialism, it's the radical left, it's the fascist, Nazi, whatever it is. These are all narratives to hide you from how the world really works, in my understanding of the world. So the question really is right now at this phase where we've had the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, we've had America say that there's complete, victory, and yet Iran and IRGC are still able to fight back. So nothing's consistent. We've had Epstein file questions. Was this a blackmail operation? We've had, is Netanyahu alive? We've had decapitation campaigns within IRGC. All of these events have been happening over the last 3 weeks so that everybody gets the narrative that they need to off-ramp and move to the next phase of a regionally stable Middle East, the exit of America, transition to multipolar world, renegotiation of all contracts. And so you have to ask yourself, does anyone benefit from continuing this war right now? Well, from Iran's perspective, they are deeper into a dependency into China. China, which has relationships with the entire Middle East, the West, America, everyone. Everyone is dependent, but Iran is particularly dependent upon China to purchase that oil. So Iran effectively has shown that you're never going to be able to regime change. You're never going to be able to invade, but they've done decapitation campaigns. And until we're at a point where there is an IRGC and a reformist, Iranian government that are in line with what I believe is China's plan for normalization in the region and expulsion of US interests. And so once Iran has achieved all their goals, is there any benefit to continuing? Because the longer this goes on, the worse it gets, the more the world could start blaming Iran for what happened. At the moment, they believe Trump did it or Israel did it, which is the prevalent narrative. So Iran is at a maximum leverage point. They could close the Red Sea by activating the Houthis, which would drive the price of oil to unsustainable levels. We start getting demand destruction. then that has impacts on China, which has impacts on the world and all those different things. So Iran is at maximum leverage point right now. What about the US? The US has a rhetoric that they can say, we took out the IRGC, we took out the nuclear program, we took out all of the weapons threat, and as a justification for what comes next in terms of the inflation and everything. So US has, nothing extra to gain once we have leadership in Israel and Iran that are on board with China's plan. And then you have the Gulf and the financial industrial complex that are able to then say, hey, Mick, you've done your job. We now need to move to the next phase of profiting from rebuild contracts. We've renegotiated everything. Now it's time to get the off ramps. Does Israel benefit from this? If US falls, Israel falls with it. This whole debate that I had with Professor Zhang, where he thinks you destroy all the Gulf countries, you destroy the West, and then Pax Judaica and Israel become the next empire. I mean, Israel would be impacted by this. They've already lost all their revenue from not selling LNG to Egypt and Jordan. They've already had damage inflicted upon them, population growth decrease, significant debt increase. The stocks are going up, which means private sector is taking over national sector. They already have a victory narrative. So Israel doesn't gain, but there are certain factions of power within the US, within Iran, within Israel that have their personal interests and they'll be leveraging their personal negotiations. For example, those that benefit from war, military stocks. You have private interests, and you have those people that need to be compensated or eliminated. And that's what I believe we're witnessing. Once that is achieved, you get the off ramps, and I think that's being built. The Gulf countries have effectively hedged with their investments in US energy infrastructure. They've inflicted the damage that will have severe economic consequences. But do they benefit from keep retaliating, going into a major regional war? Absolutely not. So Iran has effectively eliminated all the tools of US colonization, and the Gulf countries don't benefit from continuing the war. Does China benefit from continuing the war? Well, they have vast reserves, and the deeper we go into a global recession, the less exports they can do, and they will enter into economic strife, which then has impact on America and everybody else as well. So China, if they have achieved the strategic goals of what they wanted to achieve, I believe at this point they have no benefit of continuing. What about Russia? Well, Russia does. Russia's pretty much the only player. So some of the false flags, I know most people think it's Israel, and it probably is. The military industrial complex aligned factions of radical Zionism and neocons that may be doing these false flag operations, but also Russia does benefit. I covered that last week, how Russia has been the net winner from this, but they have genuine output constraints. They don't have unlimited gas and unlimited oil, and they get to trade it at higher prices. But at the end of the day, if demand destruction kicks in, both Iran and Russia are very insulated because of sanctions, but they still need China to prevail as a dominant force in order to continue all of the alternative payment rails, barter networks, trade routes, sanction resistant, de-dollarization infrastructure that they've set up. So while Russia might look to maximize it, that's the one that kind of benefits. And most people think Israel, but it's not reality. Like Israel, factions of power within Israel, but this is very destructive to the Israeli economy. But that doesn't, the more and more privatization happens as a result of it, the more and more debt, the more K-shaped economy, the more civil unrest. And obviously Netanyahu is maximizing his leverage before he gets regime changed as well. And he has to serve various other interests. But at this stage, all incentives point towards exit for everybody, with the exception of a few factions. And I believe that's the decapitation campaigns and the regime change. So they're being negotiated as well. So there are kind of two layers of this war. There is what's really happening, the demolition, the narrative towards World War III, the infrastructure that's being destroyed, what you're seeing on TV, what's being portrayed in X spaces, and basically the structural reality. Then there's what's being negotiated. And what's being negotiated, I believe, has never stopped, which is a continual negotiation. And part of that was this war. Then you execute what has been negotiated. You continue around the table. You have people that try and derail the plan. And then you have transnational capital that gets around through their diplomatic channels and communication channels. And in the end, Iran's going to get sanctions relief and integration into the region. That is what the Gulf countries want. That is what effectively Iran has always been trying to achieve, but America stopped it because they wanted strategic tension, Israel, Iran, death to America, death to Israel, justification for the forever war, resource extraction, and subordination of any sovereign dependency and domination by US. But now China exists, so that doesn't exist anymore. The US absolutely needs lower oil prices and a pivot to effectively Asia. This multipolar world transition needs to happen because America is dependent to replenish its military on China, rare earth minerals, manufacturing base, lower cost. And what's happened as a result of this war is that the dollar went from weakening to strengthening. DXY is up to about $100. The price of gold went down, the price of silver went down. So we went back to, during this war, people demanding dollars, which pushed the price up, which means you reverse the ability to remain independent and build the manufacturing base. Your exports become more expensive, and you end up boosting China and you become more dependent upon China. The higher the dollar goes, the lower the Chinese yuan goes. And so that reverses this shift. And so America needs to reverse that. They need to weaken the dollar, remove world reserve currency, become a regional power, subordinate its neighbors for private financial interest, and they need lower oil prices. Now they can negotiate, but if oil prices go above $160, we enter into a global financial crisis that breaks so many components in the US financial system, and the financial industrial complex, the FIC, need these lower oil prices once the reset has actually happened. And that's represented by an agreement. Now they're creating narrative that they're going to be able to brute force it. That's not part of the agreement that America, but I do believe the financial industrial complex wants to control part of the Strait of Hormuz strategic choke points in a coexisting relationship with China and with the West Asia as well. And that will be a part of getting to this new global reset, regional stability with security guarantees as part of the negotiation. Israel needs its victory narrative. We chopped off the head of the snake. There's no longer ballistic missiles. And Netanyahu, some people are speculating it's AI and it's not real. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. The jury's out, but he's already giving his off-ramp narrative. He's already saying there are no more ballistic missiles, despite the fact that ballistic missiles are being fired. But he just needs the off-ramp narrative, and then whatever transition he's negotiated for himself to a very different version of Israel under the next leadership. The Gulf needs stability. This has had a significant economic impact. And Qatar and Saudi were hedged through other investments, but overall, you can benefit from the price of oil increase. They had their alternative pipelines to take 50% of the shock factor. They had their investments in their partnerships with Russia, China, and US, Texas oil and gas infrastructure, which will be beneficial to the renegotiation contracts. But it really has framed Saudi as the leader and UAE as the one that is most impacted. That is full vassalization of UAE into the FIC and the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds eventually, as is Israel, and as is the weakening campaign with the reformed Iran that I predict will emerge from this. So the Gulf needs stability ASAP, because the more impact it gets, the more benefit it goes to thicken their negotiation, but they don't want demand destruction by oil prices going up. So this has to end, and it has to end ASAP once the renegotiations are done. But um, what else have we got here? Right. So those are all the visible, those are all the things that are happening in reality behind the scenes you can't see. Then you have the visible things, the things that you do see. What you're seeing is you're being fed massive escalation that drives us to World War III. You're seeing strikes that are destroying infrastructure, that are destroying economies, that are going to escalate towards, Iran and the Gulf countries fighting each other, which I don't believe is part of the equation. Anything that goes back and forth there will be a tick for tack for optics only. And we're already seeing new defense munitions and contracts being signed with US at the moment. And so they get their stimulus. US is going out trying to raise 200 billion for a military industrial complex stimulus. They get to sell additional weapons, but the infrastructure is being taken down and taken out. We're seeing lots of rhetoric from all sides. America saying we're the greatest, we're the best, we've won. Israel saying we've taken down the head of a snake. Iran is terrorism will no longer threaten us. We're going to rebuild these oil routes, Greater Israel Project, all the different things to the different factions. On the Iran and IRGC side, we're seeing we're fighting a holy war. We are taking on imperial Western powers, and there ain't nothing the Gulf countries do. We got a very large army. We got partnerships with Russia and China, superior intelligence, asymmetric warfare. We got drones that are very cheap to produce with our own internal manufacturing base. This costs billions of dollars for America and Israel, and all of the different rhetoric that's coming from it as well. We're not negotiating all that type of stuff. This is what I call negotiation theater. This is every time you announce something, it is a signal to the other side around the points that are being negotiated. Okay, so what is the market signal that we're seeing? So yesterday, I haven't looked at the markets today because I'm recording this a bit early, but oil went up to about $115, and we started to see a disjointment in, for example, in Oman, the price went to $150 to $170. In America, it was a bit cheaper at 19.95, around those points. Europe started getting significant increases in energy. This is massive, massive leverage in negotiation, but so far it hasn't gone part that psychological part. I believe that America has a structural short futures contract in order to suppress the price. Now we're starting to get Iranian sanction relief for oil on water, just like we saw for Russia. Iran is selling into these higher prices. The strait is open for China and Iran, and now they're getting sanction relief, as it was the case for Russia. And so that's keeping oil within that ceiling. Now, what happened yesterday? As we were escalating, the price of gold crashed down to approximately a low of 4,700 from a high of 5,500. So, we've almost in the peak lost about $1,000 in these moves. Silver came back down to $70, and the VIX went from peak volatility of about 27 to about 22. So volatility is decreasing. Gold off ramps led to a market crash. Peak buying by retail of gold and silver and commodities, but institutions were selling into that. That means the smart money knows that this is coming to an end, and they believe that that this is not going to escalate to World War III or a ginormous regional war. That this is strategic targeting. We're seeing way more targeting of infrastructure that impacts prices. If Iran was genuinely here to eliminate Israel, then we would have seen way more aggressive action on Israeli assets. But instead, it's just been targeting at the financial infrastructure and the economic war. We had the Federal Reserve come out and said we're going to hold rates. We had the hot print in inflation. But markets is pricing that this is going to be, um, basically, constrained. This isn't going to get out of control, despite the optics saying that it is going to get out of control. The economic impact is here: recession, demand destruction, inflation cycle. Everyone needs to prepare for inflation. Nothing stops that train. Supply chain disruption. All of that's going to happen throughout 2026 and maybe into 2027. But everything's pointing towards resolution because there's nothing to gain for anybody. We've already seen that oil threshold. I covered this last week. $110 to $120. Once 120 kicks in, you start to get a bigger and bigger inflation shock. You start to get a political crisis between the players. You start to see the more severe recession kick in. And at basically $115, everything kind of flips around that to making sure it doesn't get too above. And as I said, I believe US has a structural short position to suppress the prices, so they need the price to come down at some stage within the futures contract or option contract expiry definition. Now, we've already had leadership disruption. On the Iran side, we no longer have Khamenei, but it was replaced with Khamenei. I believe Khamenei was cooperating with this transition of normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered via China. And I believe that his son will be succession planning. I don't believe it's going to be what people think. I think this is going to be pragmatic. Now, if the son gets taken out, maybe that's the next thing we see in the escalation cycle, or maybe he's the one that's actually supporting that he can sign off on the plan once the plan is agreed and everyone has to go with it, including IRGC. Then you have various factions of IRGC that have been through the decapitation campaign. We haven't seen Khamenei, the son yet, so there's been no public, so we're not sure. There's uncertainty. What comes from that? We saw Lonjani, which basically we got a confirmation that he has been taken out, and there were 3 leadership positions this week that were taken out that I believe would come into IRGC hardliners. This one was a bit confusing because he's a bit more pragmatic. So I'm not sure, why that needed to happen or what's happening behind the scenes. But I believe that now already you could say the IRGC that remains, that's ready for a deal, if they are ready for a deal, they've been hit. So that gives the narrative that's needed for the off-ramps. On the Israel side, we've had really strange things with Netanyahu. We've had accusations that his last 3 updates are AI, with actually very plausible cases. I don't know what the outcome of that is, but we also saw in the last video that some allege is AI, others say is real. There was no press invited. So very suspicious circumstances that people are speculating. You had the 6 fingers. You had the coffee shop where he looked like he was 10 years, 20 years younger. So very suspicious and strange circumstances around that. But he's absent from all the meetings. He's not engaging in the political process to the extent that he was before. And he's also giving an off-ramps narrative. He's saying Iran no longer has ballistic missiles, talking about energy routes and various other things. There is the vice president or prime minister, sorry, I forget which one it is. Levin, is he working as interim? Well, he's more extreme. So does that create a more extreme narrative until we get to this transition to a reformist and leftist government? And so, Katz is allegedly leading at the moment. And so the frame is really set for a transition to a left-leaning, GCC integrated, Palestinian solution recognized regional stability as per China's plan. Normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Palestinian resolution. And remember what I've always said. I said peace in the Middle East happens when you normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, you resolve the Palestinian cause so the military Israel stops being used as a MiC destabilization outpost, and you need America to exit the region. This is America's exit. This is all of those things. So that's why I believe that this is genuinely going to lead to something better at the end of it. Everybody needs their on ramp, their off ramp narrative, and I'm starting to see some of those different things coming. So both in Iran and Israel, we're seeing instability in terms of leadership. We're seeing change, and we're seeing a transition path as well. But the markets are calm relative to this is such a disaster. Gold prices should be shooting up if this was genuine escalation cycle. Stock market should be reacting more aggressively. It is pricing in the disruption, the inflationary cycle and the demand destruction and recession cycle, but it's not disaster. The markets are far too calm. They know something. And so the interpretation that I have is that basically all of the problems that we're seeing and being identified right now are becoming the incentives for the renegotiation as well. Now, who is left that may be trying to derail the plan? And what are the incentives? Who could derail this? And I think that a lot of that is happening when we've have targeting of Iranian school children, 6 to 12-year-old. So sad. Absolute tragedy. Who's doing these operations? US is blame shifting, saying we're not sure if it was us. It was either US or Israel, or and obviously for Israel that's normal as well. But for Netanyahu, he basically needs war in order to try and get he needs war in order to get maximum leverage, but he also needs to manage the transition if his deal has been agreed to. So he needs to be useful for power, otherwise he could be eliminated. There could be internal elimination. There could be external elimination. That could come from any faction of power. That could come from Iran, IRGC. It could come from China. It could come from Russia. It could come from America. It could come internal in Israel. It could come from private interest that doesn't like the direction that Netanyahu's taking it. It could come from radical, neocon Zionists. It could come military industrial complex, deep state, whatever it is. We don't know, but there are many hurdles around Netanyahu. And Mujtaba Khomeini, like the other one. Now, he can't just suddenly come out and announce peace, because if he does it too early, it looks like he's tapped out. So these are problematic things. I'm not sure what the strategy is, but I'll be observing these things in terms of the off ramps as well. These are effectively blockers to peace. You can't have new leadership that negotiates peace right away without a severe Hollywood theatrical movement, and also Netanyahu's personal interest as well as factions of power within the IRGC that benefit from the economy that's been set up under sanctions, which is once you react to sanctions, you have partnership with trafficking routes, you have personal interest in military contracts, you have various power that is enforced via controlling trafficking routes. So you have internal struggles as well. And these can all be impediments to what I thought would be a 12-day war, a bit more theatrical and controlled, to where we are right now. But everything is moving faster directionally in the same direction. So what are the shifts we've seen in week 3? Many of the blockers have been effectively removed or eliminated in terms of hardliners, in terms of rumors about what's been happening in Israel. We've had many people sidelined in order to move towards the plan. Obstacles removed, by targeting assets, renegotiating contracts, and we are now in what I call a settlement window. The settlement window is what I think we're in week 3. So this is where I think those that were negotiating have already started deciding on where are we at, what are the obstacles, what do we do next, how do we get this to a settlement so we don't derail, and the fact that no one really gains from this at this stage. What we have as well in terms of the real control, both on the military side, but it's also the financial side. So FIC has powers. So MIC has military escalation, and FIC has, as I said, FIC controls shares in MIC, so they never allow it to go out of control, but sometimes they go off on separate paths. MIC is funded by Pentagon budgets. They have a degree of autonomy. FIC controls capital markets, so they can destroy share price. They need to get the balance right here when they enter into these battles. Now, even FIC and MIC can be aligned because they want to maximize profits in the war before they set the narrative for the next war theater as well. Obviously, Europe, Central South America, and any narrative around Taiwan and the around the Asia side as well. But insurance is a real mechanism of control. As I said, you can shut down the strait by allowing planes to be insured, allowing insurance in the Red Sea, but not allowing insurance in the in that side. We are still yet to get conclusive evidence that any ships have actually been destroyed. There was one in Sri Lanka. There was shrapnel that has been hit. There's been rhetoric, but we don't have conclusive evidence that this has been enforced through naval warfare yet. And remember, if you take out ships with oil tankers, then you have the destruction of the water infrastructure, which would be very harmful to everybody, Qatar, to Iran. So no one benefits from allowing that escalation cycle to go that far. And of course, if this was to the point where you wanted to inflict lethal destruction, then there would be targeting of water sanitation plants. We did see one that I believe to be a false flag in Iran. But if there was a retaliation to the Gulf countries, that's full water dependency. That's absolute, disaster. That's a Hiroshima bomb in terms of civilian targets as well. Now, America has been doing that in Cuba with wiping out their energy infrastructure, which is terrorism to the highest degree, but only shipments, that it's only really insurance that's kind of held that right now. So that can be returned by insuring, which needs settlement and obviously as well. But insurance, they cancelled, I think, quite strategically. As I said, the planes were going, the Red Sea was never cancelled, but it was for the Strait of Hormuz. So there's an element of financial interception there as well, in that stuff, in terms of those control and flow. Now that sets a renegotiation of energy contracts, which helps the financial industrial complex as well, which is what is really happening here. If you could summarize everything, it is an energy reset. That's what is the real impact. And it's not just oil. The Hormuz, as I've said in previous episode, it requires liquefied natural gas, LNG, for electricity. It also has a significant stranglehold on fertilizers, which impacts the agricultural industry. Also, aluminium, which is important for many manufacturing components and various other things. Petrochemicals for the pharmaceutical industries. Helium is the latest one where we've seen significant interest. That is no alternative dependency, essential for certain supply chains. Shipping, power. There is effectively, by closing the Strait of Hormuz, 50 different systems that I'm aware of that basically need to be renegotiated and are basically repricing simultaneously. We're getting absolute carnage in the commodities markets. And this is going to cause carnage in the supply chains for the rest of the year, even if we open today. This is going to take a long time to shift through. So the global reset has happened, even if we get the outcome right now. But what has become effectively the smoking gun is liquefied natural gas, electricity, AI trade, semiconductor chips, all sorts of stuff. And so what we saw this week is that there was effectively an Iran was stricken. Iran strikes. America said it wasn't us. Israel said we did it without America in the Netanyahu, what might have been AI or might have been real speech. And Trump provided the narrative that we ask Israel not to do that again. And so we had the strikes, we had the plausible deniability, we had Now, Netanyahu's cooperating in all narratives now. That implies to me that he has reached his settlement and he is complying with that settlement in the AI speeches or real speeches, whichever one it is. But anyway, we had the targeting of LNG infrastructure within Iran that created the new escalation cycle, pushed the price of gas in Europe up 30%, and pushed the price of oil up to these new levels with the disjointed prices that I've been covering. That was Las Latani. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Yeah, basically that took us to the next reaction. I gave a market update in real time and said Iran has to retaliate to that. And so there was a retaliation on Qatar LNG structures. And so this halts the LNG contracts. We had the declaration of force majeure affecting mainly Asian countries and some European countries. So now Asian countries need to renegotiate with Russia, and European countries either need to renegotiate with Russia or need to renegotiate with America. So European gas, we're now up approximately 52%. And that was really the main publicly facing thing. That creates economic crisis within Europe, more subordination, more vassalization into private sector interest, more acquisitions, more K-shaped economy, more wealth inequality, potential austerity. The government is used just for propping up, the MIC and the FIC and the TIC. Civil unrest can be used in order to create the police and surveillance state. But here's the hidden parts that people don't consider or didn't actually, maybe they didn't know if they're not following the money. There is something called the Golden Pass LNG structure within Texas. And that is 70% owned by Qatar and 30% owned by ExxonMobil. And so if you renegotiate, you do force majeure within the Qatar at the lower prices, renegotiate contracts via the US rails, then does that not explain the US-Qatari relationship? On the surface, Qatar's being decimated, destroyed, and US is profiteering. On the other side, they were completely lined and hedged up for this. So the US is the largest LNG exporter in the world. That's what changed this whole multipolar world order and led to where we are. Europe effectively takes 68% of its oil after the Russian sanctions, and that will increase now that we've had the Qatari closure, but they can hedge it via the US Texas industry. So who benefits from that? It's not America as a nation, it's US LNG producers. And that is owned by Qatar and ExxonMobil. And so this shifts geography, creates new strategic choke points, and vassalizes US interest into the private sector US LNG that is owned by Qatari interests as well. And so this is privatization. It doesn't help America. You get the rhetoric, America's benefiting, Trump, you're the savior, you're helping us, but all you're doing is vassalizing assets into the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund, and also creating strategic choke points for the financial industrial complex and obviously ExxonMobil. So this basically helps US energy dominance in the Western Hemisphere, but that is vassalized and owned by the private financial industrial complex, big oil, and private corporate interests, which is managed by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, managed by Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund inflows, China Sovereign Wealth Fund, Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, and others that are able to use their energy and control energy flows. So that's really the key insights. Basically, the entity that lost the supply owns the repurchase supply, and you get to renegotiate on separate terms at higher prices in distress. So net that all out, and you're probably better off overall. We'll see. And so really the conclusion is that this is not disruption. This is 100% transition. Okay. What about fertilizers and food? That's going to cause major supply chain issues throughout the year that we've all got to adjust to. There will be issues in shelving. I'm already starting to see this. I went to a shop. I wanted to buy some dates to break my fast. They were relying upon dates from Qatar, and they're out of stock. So I've already just started to see the beginning parts of that. But there are fixed windows when you do agricultural industry. You have to meet the seasons. Now, I talked about India needing fertilizers. It looks like they had enough fertilizer strategic reserves in order to make this crop. But if this goes on for longer, then they either renegotiate those terms or they have food insecurity. So that gives leverage to the American agricultural trade, which is those multinationals, but that creates issue with the farmers in India. That disruption can be weaponized by the financial industrial complex to get a strategic foothold in BRICS, so that they can get more distressed purchases of the agriculture industry. Then that gives them more leverage as we transition to this multipolar world. So they can use US to push that disruption. And that disruption basically, it basically leads to premature losses, renegotiation of contracts, delayed global, food crisis. And what can you do with a food crisis? You can push a narrative that you need to consume this type of food, not this type of food. You will own nothing and be happy. And you'll start to get the large World Economic Forum funded organizations around food insecurity pushing out their propaganda as a result of this disruption. So we're going to see that throughout 2026. Energy narratives, food narratives based upon these supply chains. And that's going to create an industrial cascade. Now, what was the end result of tariff policies, COVID, Operation Warp Speed? The end result is large multinational institutions gobbled up all the small business, and you ended up with massive wealth inequality, concentration of power. Trump has done it again. This is the new Operation Warp Speed based upon the Iran war, and this will lead to massive concentration, just like the tariffs did. Remember, I said tariffs will create small businesses being concentrated into large business within America, export dependent countries being concentrated into the same multinational institutions, and everybody renegotiating eastward with reliable partners in ASEAN blocks and GCC blocks. And we're starting to see disrupt that. And then you have this new cascading concentration of power in this. So we've seen aluminium price spikes that causes issues in supply chains, issues in petrochemicals and pharmaceuticals, plastics get disrupted, the supply chains that pushes prices up, power, everything is basically repricing as a result of this. And I believe by design. That's why you have these big impacts. Now, one of them also is helium and artificial intelligence. This one becomes really structurally important. Much of the growth from America was dependent upon building the data centers for AI. That was boosting manufacturing, boosting technology purchases, providing stimulus justification with, Operation, I think it was Stargate, the first thing Trump announced. Half a billion, I think it was $500 billion, 500 billion, yeah, invested in that. That helps the technical industrial complex. They're going to be going through stress that might lead to consolidation. Maybe we don't get IPOs this year. The IPOs is what would lead to the growth. If you don't get the OpenAI IPO, maybe SpaceX connected to xAI, Anthropic, these were all meant to happen. Maybe they get consolidated into Google, Apple, some of the big tech, more concentration. We may not get those IPOs if this carries on for a lot longer. But with helium, 35% of the supply is impacted as a result of the Strait of Hormuz. This basically is also needed in the semiconductor industry, which requires South Africa to get LNG. Sorry, not South Africa, South Korea rather. And that impacts the AI trade, semiconductor trade, renegotiation of AI chips, and also healthcare as well. All of these different things. The shipping chaos, initially it was 7,000 ships in the backlog. They were all waiting. I've heard that it's about 3,500 right now. We have initially 400 tankers that represents 200 million barrels. And so you can have sanction relief on the oil on water. They're going back and forth, renegotiating, based upon who's going to pay the rest, who's in the crisis the most. That's pushing up prices. That's leading to predatory terms. We've got basically floating reporting systems and all of this type of disruption. Okay. In terms of Iran, so they cannot spill oil. So if they do something that leads to the contamination of the water, that's something they can't do in terms of the escalation cycle. So all they can do is basically destroy the infrastructure that leads to these renegotiations and prices. Now, this impacts the Gulf populations if there were any type of oil spillage and any type of infrastructure that actually targets, the actual people. This is leading to a lot of people leaving. In the case of Dubai, they're starting to see that people were selling their gold below spot. Gold is the largest market of gold is Dubai. We started to see the central bank of Dubai look to help the banks. There was targeting of Citibank, which is quite symbolic. So they're targeting banking infrastructure, Western infrastructure, and people are starting to sell gold. Why are they selling gold? Because if you're fleeing a country, then you can't take your gold with you because where you land may confiscate it. And so the price of Bitcoin started going up because people were converting gold to Bitcoin so they can hold it in self-custody. And then they're able to take their wealth wherever they need to go. Now, people were willing to buy it at a discount, but it was 30 to 50 cents below the spot prices. The financial system was impacted. We also had indications that you don't own your money. This is where the self-custody story comes in. They built a financial sector and they said, in distress, we'll stop you being able to withdraw. So this weakens their reputation as a financial hub, which has a correction in real estate. And what are institutional buyers doing? They're buying up Dubai real estate. So Dubai is being vassalized into the financial industrial complex as a strategic leverage point over the GCC in partnership with the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds, while Saudi ends up being the person that solved the oil, the person that solved the pipelines, the person that came in against UAE, the country that also held out for a Palestinian cause. Everything is being lined up for Saudi to be the global hegemon. And remember that good cop, bad cop relationship between UAE and Saudi. I think the FIC is getting UAE. They will acquire assets in Israel as it gets more distress. And Saudi is being set as the global hegemon in partnership with Egypt and Turkey as the military wings of a regional stability as well. Escalations are controlled, though. People think it's chaos. I've been watching every single escalation. It's always controlled and contained to enter into a new phase of negotiation of financial contracts. This may be that in order for Iran to get sanctions relief, this is what they needed to deliver for China that was negotiating via the Gulf funds, that was in partnership with the financial industrial complex. You have the communication channels via Qatar, various other communication channels. It may be to get sanctions relief, you needed to implement this global reset and effectively outsource the destruction and expulsion of US from the region in order to have this massively changing end vision of regional stability. Now, well, the one we need to watch right now, and it may have changed in real time today, is the Red Sea risk. So the alternative routes with the Strait of Hormuz closure has been that you can get alternative pipelines via UAE and Saudi Arabia that's taken the 20 million barrels to the point where they can still get 7 million barrels out. But it relies upon the Red Sea. The Red Sea, if you remember, was closed as a result of a Houthis blockade when they targeted a ship. Under the Biden administration, they did massive air campaigns that didn't take out the Houthis. Then under the Trump administration, they did the same thing. And then the ceasefire was agreed. The Houthis enter an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia expelled UAE. UAE got the strategic points in Somaliland. Turkey got the Somalia route. So all of the different choke points have been renegotiated. However, the Saudi agreement and the Houthis agreement needs to hold. At the moment, they're starting to give indications that they could close the Red Sea. This might be the theatrical final wave that gets us to a dramatical end game. But if we have closure in the Red Sea, we're definitely going to get to the next stage of escalation cycle with increases in prices again, both gas and oil as well. This could take oil to approximately $150. It already is in Oman, plus. And once it gets to $160, I think that is the point of end. Now, whether that happens or not, we'll see. But this creates the global breakdown at $160 where all players lose because you just have massive demand destruction. You break the financial system. You don't get the bailout you need. The bailouts are ineffective. You get a depression rather than a recession. So none of that can happen, but this might push it towards that. And then we get the off-ramp narrative where no one would gain and everybody needs to do this as well. So Houthis could provide the off-ramp narrative, or it could be something like Operation Midnight Hammer, or it could be a limited ground invasion with 6,000 troops in Island. Now, remember, we've been hearing about the island where 90% of Iran's energy exports happen. However, I spoke to an energy expert. Between 2019 and 2022, that was closed. They have alternative port infrastructure. They've already hedged against that. So from what I've heard, it will increase prices. It will make things a bit more difficult, but it's not fatal. It doesn't kill the market to $160 or above. And if you want to invade Iran proper, you need 600,000 troops. And so far, we've just seen there are a few thousand there and a few thousand more. So to me, this is the theatrical element of the off-ramp narrative. We also need to be aware of Russia because Russia does benefit if this goes on for longer. So maybe they're going off plan slightly. They're basically exporting 4.11 million barrel per day exports. So they're the largest supplier at the moment. 3.44 million barrels is up 99K to their average. And these are record prices. I mean, the biggest we've had is $147. But if we get those record prices, and they're selling them to India, so that vassalizes India further into the control grid as a resistance against the financial industrial complex. And they kind of benefit from longer, but they don't want demand destruction. But this is basically the biggest revenue surge I think Russia has ever seen. When we look at and remember, this is nationalized oil. This isn't privatized oil. So it helps the actual people, the war effort, their power, their negotiation power, everything. But the end result of all of this is Europe is going to be vassalized into US LNG structure, which is privatized into the financial industrial complex, which also has partnership rails with the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds as well. Asia is going to be vassalized into Russian oil rails and infrastructure. China is effectively going to be dependent upon Iranian oil, Gulf oil, all the different energy supplies. They will eventually build their alternative rails as well, like solar panels, wind power, everything they're doing. And obviously, Europe will want to buy a hedge against America, so they'll end up buying a bunch of stuff from China in order to facilitate that. That can only be more expensive as well. So, you get a revival of that, energy net zero type of thing as well. We also started to hear different types of things which might have been involved in the negotiation. We heard China say that if Taiwan wants help because they are energy insecure, in their partnership with Russia, then if you want to have a nice reunification, a peaceful reunification with China, of course we want to help our brothers and sisters in Taiwan. And obviously that reduces financial industrial complex, but there may have been a negotiation there leading up to the Xi Jinping meeting. Now we've heard that that might be delayed. I don't know whether it will be delayed or not. Maybe they meet on time, maybe they don't. But all of these different things are leading up to that well-defined. This means Ukraine integration being split across BlackRock financial industrial complex, vassalized into Russia, and the new security architecture. But they want war. Military need new war, so I think they'll continue that for the foreseeable future in order to make up for lost profits in the Middle East. But basically, the Middle East is using this with the sovereign wealth funds negotiating with the financial industrial complex in order to get the most favorable terms, and the escalation cycles are pushing those contracts in favor based upon false flags, but everything's coming towards a completely different multipolar world in my side. Europe is going to be completely vassalized into the financial industrial complex, no autonomy, all decision making for private interest. And Central and South America is basically being pushed into FIC as well. And Trump obviously created the narrative with Cuba through energy insecurity, also giving some of the Gulf funds and Chevron and Exxon. Exxon pulled out. Chevron can't do it at a profit. Some of the Venezuelan contracts, only Saudi can do that at those lower oil prices by having a longer term vision. And obviously, this is the Western Hemisphere, and that keeps those rails going. No one in America is going to benefit from the oil. The strategic petroleum reserves are being reduced. Inflation is going up. That's what the more people. Debt's going up. But a few oil companies get to benefit from the oil price increase as a result of it. But you're told we're MAGA. America's making America great again. This is the multipolar energy map. That was the purpose for this war. And they have escalated rather than a 12-day war into a complete global reset. The world has never been the same again. Now, what does this actually mean for everybody? So there is financial stress in the private credit markets. That's the AI trade. If this goes on for too long, that stress becomes socialized losses, privatized gains. There may be a bailout, a few $1 trillion, maybe $5 trillion, that's needed for that. What about any of the AI funding and the AI infrastructure? That's a strategic choke point for the technical industrial complex and leverage in their negotiations. That may have to be bailed out if you haven't got the gold funds, if you haven't got the private credit, which was providing that funding. If you enter into a recession, maybe there's another $5 trillion print that's needed that. What if we continue this and we don't get withdrawals and we get Red Sea? That would need to stimulus checks, military industrial complex stimulus checks, increased budget, which we're already seeing 200 billion, plus individual stimulus checks as well. So maybe there's another trillion there. Losses are going to be basically absorbed in by the large multinational financial institutions that will socialize the losses, privatize the game, will get concentration of wealth. This is effectively Operation Warp Speed 2.0. Thanks, Trump. Again, nothing to do with Trump. He's just serving financial power and getting rich, as do all politicians. Right, we started to see issues in the bond market. The bond market is indicating stagflation. So a period of low economic growth into a recession, high inflation, and higher cost of borrowing, which means you have the rates are going up and up globally. Yields on 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds, 30-year bonds, 2-year bonds in more distressed countries like UK, they're all going up. And so that creates another issue. So the fact yields is going up, but the debt cost is going up. So we're being, more and more debt is being issued at higher and higher prices. That creates a financial crisis stress on the debt rollover. And so if that's resolved through a big print plus oil prices, there's nothing but inflation. Inflation is inevitable, predictable, guaranteed. That will create a slowdown. Slowdown then leads to deflation. And that creates massive US political pressure. And so that's why this has to come to an end. There's no situation where I can see this going on for months without a ginormous depression where everybody loses. And so I believe everybody will be planning their exit right now. On the Trump side, they'll be planning their closure victory narrative, and they're preparing it this week and next week. And what did we see? We saw Joe Kent. Joe Kent worked for the Department of Homeland Security, and he put a letter out there. He's doing the podcast circuit. I don't believe it's organic. He said, I retired because this war was for Israel, so blamed it just on Israel. It is Israel. It's totally their fault. But Israel is a division of the US military, which is captured, and it benefits this whole structural rollover of the debt-based Ponzi scheme and wealth extraction from the American people via this money laundering organization to the asset holder as well. So the blame Israel narrative persists. So Trump can take the off-ramps by saying, I'm the hero. This was Israel's thing. It could be a covert narrative. And we're starting to see podcasters like David Sachs from the PayPal Mafia partnership with Peter Thiel being AI infrastructure, stablecoin AI infrastructure, and also Elon Musk building out the social credit score. But on his podcast circuit, David Sachs is starting to say, we need to exit. This could destroy Israel, admitting that Iran has the capacity, which is the alternative narrative to the Trump narrative. So you have these competing assets, which I believe are leading to off-ramp. You're getting it from Netanyahu, you're getting it from Trump, you're getting it from financial industrial complex, military industrial complex, technical industrial complex, and you're getting, and I believe you'll be getting it from the IRGC and Iran as well. We've seen NATO fragmentation as a result of this. Trump came along, said, hey, Japan, hey, Europe, hey, South Korea, join us in opening up the Strait of Hormuz. They can't do it. America can't do it. And they all said they can't do it. So this is fragmenting the NATO partnership as well. And that's causing lots of volatility. But effectively, the strait is closed until IRGC agrees to it, and there's no alternative. And so IRGC has to be engaged in diplomacy. If there's more decapitation campaigns to get to the end result, it's going to happen. I don't see an alternative. There's no way you drop a nuke that creates demand destruction everywhere. Everyone just then needs gold, and Bitcoin in self-custody. Price will probably correct, but it will be anything in your hand that helps you in that scenario. I don't believe that's really what's happening here. Yeah, there's no option to open the strait without a negotiation. Military pressure can't be applied without creating destruction across the whole region. So, and I believe FIC is in charge as well. So this is managed escalation with MIC, bounded by FIC, and oil price is the mechanism. Europe is going to obviously rearm. That was part of the negotiation. You'll have new defense markets as a result of these negotiations. And I believe the US-Israeli split narrative is, coming. And really, who is the FIC vassalizing? Israel, India, UAE. And so that's the partnership that is formed that is providing the negotiation pressure against the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the other FIC-aligned factions as well. And so this is merging into a final agreement. It enables the reset. And then we're also seeing Iran repositioning. So in the Joe Kent letter, it said, Iran does not pose a threat. There is no it was no threat to America. And so we're already starting to see on US rails, Tucker Carlson saying Iran's not a threat. Um, and even Netanyahu saying there's no ballistic missiles. All of that points towards America started the war, Iran is in defense. And so you have a repositioning of in the mind where even Americans are supporting Iran in this war against Israel. And so you get, really a repositioning of Iran. We're taking out the hardliners, we're removing the program, and then they're going to open up with the financial industrial complex in exchange for sanction relief. They're no longer the rogue. They are now in this operation, in the mind of many, the victim. So they've been repositioning the narrative. And I personally believe that Iran, via the China plan that Trump will take credit for, that I believe that this is the final delivery by the pragmatic elements of the IIGC and the reformist elements of the Iranian government in partnership with China's plan to de-dollarize and turn the Middle East into West Asia, where all new contracts will be negotiated. And I believe that Iran gets sanction relief in exchange for delivering the exact set of circumstances that allows for this transition without lighting up the Middle East. I think it's incredibly smart. I think it's incredibly pragmatic. I think it puts an end to the proxy era. I think it puts an end to the US and European empires and Sykes-Picot Act that destroyed the Middle East in endless forever wars based upon covert operations. And I think it changes the world, quite frankly. And so in the end of this, it gives the legitimacy that's needed to make the transaction after decades and decades of narrative building. And the game theory from here, as I see it, is that all powers will likely escalate to negotiate. Escalate to de-escalate, I think, is the technical term that leads to an exit off-ramps narrative and a theatrical transition that puts an end to this. There's no incentives that I'm aware of to continue other than ones that I outlined. And I think anyone that's incentivized in that direction will either be negotiated or eliminated or decapitated in order to get everything back on track in terms of where this is meant to go. Effectively, we have seen via Trump the delivery of Operation Warp Speed 2.0, which was always about selling more vaccines, resetting the world order into a technical industrial complex led order. We had Biden with the open borders in between. We have Trump with the closed borders, and the Uni Party continues exactly where it left off and transitions the world to multipolarity in an environment of collapsing birth rates where that only can be fixed, it seems, by AI and robotics. And so your job is to get on the right side of that. So what's being destroyed right now is really giving me all the indication. It's destroying infrastructure that can be rebuilt, that has significant implications in terms of Western and American allegiances, is contracts that determine the flow of energy and make countries vassals, subordinates, or leaders in terms of energy trade routes. It's trade systems and supply chains that are being destroyed and rebuilt. And it's Western dominance in the Middle East that I believe is being handed over to the financial industrial complex and a multipolar world. So what replaces it? Well, we're already in that multipolar world that I've been talking about a long time. Is BRICS that is aligned with, West via these trade agreements, which is a very dangerous strategy. So the ones that are most vassalized, i.e. UAE, India, and various other nations, can be used to infiltrate, but hopefully financial contracts, keeps things together until we enter into the next stage of theater. Um, I think we're getting reorganized flows of all energy and all agreements. And I think the structure is that the East will rebuild the infrastructure, which will be funded by the sovereign wealth funds in partnership with FIC to try and stop going back to the Mick Forever War model in the regions that have been negotiated. Continual escalation in terms of civil unrest, the private prison system, the police and surveillance state in the West, as well as agreed war zones and agreed controlled, military defense contracts. And I think Europe will be the one, and Europe, Central and South America will be the making up for lost profits, internal civil unrest, continued issues there. And a resolution to what's going to happen in Asia around, around Taiwan and various other choke points as well. The strategic tension, if it's likely to occur, will be from between India and China on the BRICS layer, and then UAE and the GCC. But I don't believe it will ever spiral into something that will reset the world order until we start this whole process again. I think the West will continue to provide innovation for as long as the stock markets are liquid, but that will be for the benefit of transnational capital. And so you have to be an asset owner in order to benefit from that. And you need to avoid debt in order to not be the product on the wrong side of that I've always seen. I think assets that are multipolar in nature that allow for self-custody is how you protect yourself, whether that's gold in physical form, whether that's Bitcoin in self-custody. We will get, at the end of this, probably 26, 27, a self-custody story, force majeure, cancellation of contracts, the understanding between the difference between paper agreements, where you will own nothing and be happy, and your ability to directly own, which will control your ability to adjust when you need to change countries, change jurisdictions. If you can't change countries, then rural, community-led. These are the initiatives of how you protect yourself. Make sure you're utilizing technology, but spending one eye on independence, decentralized solutions. These are the different things. The Middle East will be the central hub between BRICS and China-led manufacturing base. A more regional America that will need to adjust to this reality, that its military industrial complex depends upon China, and massive wealth transfer in K-shaped economies as well. So those that own the assets effectively win. Those who hold the debt become the product, is the end result. In order to get there, we needed this energy crisis in order to shift all the policy responses that we're seeing right now. That then creates the shortages that we will witness throughout 2026, and also the price spikes and volatility to reset the contracts and enforce those force majeures. You need to pick your jurisdiction for basically all the different jurisdictions will adjust based upon demand reduction. And so your governments will start saying, please reduce your dependency upon these food types, upon these energy, upon these different components. And the idea is that they want the behavior change, just like Operation Warp Speed 2.0. They wanted you at home, normalized into technology, a product of the algorithm. So your job is to spend enough time doing the opposite, but they will utilize this in order to get behavioral changes based upon energy and food insecurity. And we already got the IEA, the International Energy Association, maybe that's what it is, I'm assuming. They put out a framework today. What did it actually say? International Energy Agency. They pushed out their recommendations, just like World Health Organization recommendations. And what were those recommendations? Work from home, reduce driving, which is perfect in line with the fully autonomous drivers that are coming. Limit travel, stay at home, shift consumption patterns. What are they really saying? Basically, look at what these, what, excuse me, at the end of this right now. Effectively, look at what these actually are. It's basically less movement, less consumption, less ownership, and basically an escalation on a path to energy crisis, demand reduction, behavioral control. And where does this lead us? Basically, energy saving lockdowns is some things we might see next. We're already starting to see tracking systems and acceleration of the police and surveillance state, digital, social credit scores, digital carbon credit scores, digital enforcement, pre-crime, Palantir, all of the things that the World Economic Forum and the business interests have been working on. So your exit ramps and likely exit ramps when they try and push forward initiatives that they've been trying to push forward, individual carbon tracking and credit scores. So you will be competing with artificial intelligence for energy. You'll be choosing based upon receiving a favorable carbon credit scores. A basically reward and incentivized consumption so that you get additional points based upon what you consume, whether they consider it favorable. Programmable energy use integrated into programmable money. And we know who was here to deliver that. The key nodes in the network we've been talking about time and time again. Elon Musk, David Sachs, Peter Thiel, the PayPal mafia, the types of people that were mentioned in the Epstein files, and David Sachs started driving a little bit of the exit narrative. So this is basically how we move from war off-ramps into the control grids. And you need to be aware of it, and you need to be preparing now. You either believe this is a crisis that is being weaponized and they adjust based upon the crisis, or like me, you follow the money and you believe it's actually being engineered with multiple strategies that are hedged and they keep pushing away at the end game and nothing stopped this train. If you are deep in debt and you don't prepare for this, and I want as many people on the right side of this change, which is why I continue to give this content, you will own nothing and be happy was the phrase that they actually gave. And so with that in mind, that's everything I'm seeing in week 3, following the money, making sure you're getting ahead, and why I believe this does come to an end. And you need to adjust to the world that you see based upon trying to get ahead of this. And this is what the market is telling me. And we also saw yesterday defense stocks down, implying that we are coming towards the negotiated solution as well. So what